What would you do if your HOA decided they had the right to bulldoze your garden? I never thought I'd be the guy caught up in a ridiculous war over tomatoes and sunflowers, but here I was, staring at a letter from the HOA demanding I tear down my backyard garden. It didn't make sense. This wasn't some overgrown jungle or an eyesore covered in weeds. It was a simple, well-maintained garden box I had built with my own 2 hands. Over 3 long, sweaty days, my kids and I had turned a dull corner of our backyard into something beautiful. My wife, Emily, had loved the idea, and our little patch of green had quickly become our favorite spot to unwind. But now, apparently, my hard work violated the community's aesthetic standards. And the kicker? I wasn't even part of the HOA. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe they had mixed up addresses. I almost laughed as I reread the letter, thinking some pencil-pushing bureaucrat had sent it out without realizing I didn't pay their ridiculous fees or sign up for their rules. But just as I was about to toss the letter in the trash, something strange happened. Out in my yard, a man stood at the edge of my property, camera in hand, snapping pictures like he was documenting a crime scene. I blinked, wondering if I was seeing things. Was some neighbor admiring my work? A city inspector? No, this guy wasn't just looking, he was investigating. Annoyance bubbled in my chest as I stepped outside. Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing? The man barely reacted. He lowered the camera just enough to look me in the eye and said in the most casual, smug tone imaginable, "I'm here on behalf of the HOA. Documenting a violation." I let out a sharp laugh. A violation? Of what? You've got to be kidding me. He didn't flinch. Your backyard garden is non-compliant with HOA aesthetic guidelines. We're going to have to ask you to remove it. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, my blood pressure started rising. I don't even belong to the HOA, I snapped. You have no authority here. This is my property. He smirked, tucking his camera away. We'll see about that. You're already on our radar. Then, just like that, he turned and walked off, snapping more pictures as he went, like he had just issued a court summons and I had no choice but to comply. I stood frozen for a second, trying to process what had just happened. A total stranger had walked onto my property, taken photos without my permission, and told me that my own garden didn't fit some arbitrary rulebook I had never agreed to. The rage set in fast. This wasn't just some overzealous neighbor filing a complaint. This was the start of something bigger, something I wasn't going to let slide. I stormed back inside, still gripping the letter in my hand. Emily looked up from the kitchen table, instantly reading the frustration on my face. What happened? She asked, concern creeping into her voice. I tossed the letter onto the table. The HOA thinks they can tell me to rip out my garden. Her eyebrows shot up. But, we're not even in the HOA. Exactly, I muttered, rubbing my temples. And get this, some guy was just outside, taking pictures of our yard like we committed a crime. Emily's mouth tightened. They can't do that, can they? I have no idea, I admitted, but I knew one thing. I wasn't about to let some power-hungry group of nobodies dictate what I could do on my own land. The next morning, I woke up to a new email in my inbox. HOA notice, non-compliance warning. My stomach churned as I opened it. They were doubling down, listing my garden as an official violation and demanding I remove it within 7 days or face further action. That was just the beginning. The following days brought a flood of letters, each more aggressive than the last. First, it was a friendly reminder. Then, a formal notice. Then, threats of fines and legal action. By the end of the week, they claimed I owed them $500 for non-compliance. How the hell could I owe them money when I wasn't even a member? I wasn't the only one they were harassing. My neighbors, some of whom I'd barely spoken to before, started coming to me with their own horror stories. Mark, a retired veteran who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, knocked on my door one afternoon. He held up a fine notice, shaking his head. "You're not gonna believe this," he muttered. "They fined me for my mailbox." I frowned. "What's wrong with it?" Mark sighed. "Apparently, it's the wrong shade of beige." I stared at him, trying to process the sheer pettiness of it. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," he said. "I've had this same damn mailbox for 15 years, and suddenly, it's a problem? It's because I signed that petition last year against their fee hikes. They're targeting people, Jake. And they weren't stopping there. The HOA had been going after anyone who even remotely supported me. A neighbor named Sarah got slapped with a $250 fine for leaving her trash cans out too long, even though she had brought them in the night before. Another guy, James, got a letter about unauthorized driveway stains, and was ordered to have his pavement pressure washed within 48 hours or face a $1,000 penalty. It was blatant retaliation. But the moment that truly set me off happened 2 nights later. I was sitting on my porch, scrolling through my phone, when I got a text from David Carter, the journalist I had reached out to. "Thought you might find this interesting. Check out the HOA president's backyard." Attached was a set of pictures. My blood ran hot as I clicked on them. There, in full, incriminating detail, was Mr. Whitaker's backyard, a sprawling gazebo with a fire pit, outdoor lighting, and a massive patio extension. All of it blatantly against the same aesthetic guidelines he was trying to enforce on me. The hypocrisy was staggering. I forwarded the photos to David with one sentence: "Let's expose these bastards." The next morning, the article went live. The headline was enough to send a shockwave through the neighborhood. HOA president demands homeowner remove garden while violating his own rules. The response was instant. Neighbors flooded the HOA's inbox with angry emails. People started calling out Whitaker directly, demanding an explanation. Social media posts roasted him for being a dictator who didn't even follow his own rules. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the end. Maybe they'd back down. I should have known better. Instead of retreating, the HOA went nuclear. The next escalation came in the form of a thick envelope delivered to my mailbox. Unlike the previous threats, this one had an official-looking seal stamped on the front. I tore it open, already bracing for whatever nonsense they were throwing at me this time. My stomach twisted as I read the first line. "This letter serves as official notice that your property has been included under HOA jurisdiction effective immediately." I blinked. That wasn't possible. I never signed anything. I never agreed to be part of the HOA. My house had never been under their authority, not when I bought it, not at any point in the years I had lived here. I flipped through the pages, scanning the fine print. They had backdated documents claiming I had been part of the HOA all along, as if my exclusion had been some sort of clerical error that they were now correcting. Attached was a signature that was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. It didn't even look remotely close to my actual handwriting. I could feel my blood pressure rising. They were faking documents to try and force control over my land. Emily walked in as I was staring at the papers in disbelief. "Jake? You okay?" I shoved the letter toward her. "They forged my signature," I said, voice tight. "They're trying to claim I was always part of the HOA." Her eyes widened as she read. That's illegal, right?" "Damn right it is." I grabbed my laptop, rage simmering beneath my skin as I pulled up the county property records website. I spent the next hour combing through every filing related to my house, looking for any sign that this was legitimate. Nothing. I dug deeper, accessing public HOA records, until I found something even worse. A newly filed amendment to the HOA's bylaws. It was dated just a week ago. Properties not currently under HOA jurisdiction may be annexed for the purpose of ensuring uniform community standards. They had literally written a rule just to justify what they were doing to me. That was when I knew this wasn't just about my garden anymore. This was about control. Power. They wanted to set a precedent, that they could take over any property, any time, and the homeowner would have no say in the matter. I needed help. I immediately forwarded everything, the forged documents, the fraudulent amendment, even a side-by-side comparison of my actual signature versus their fake one, to David Carter, the journalist. His response came within minutes. "This is huge. Give me an hour." That hour turned into a bombshell article that went live the next morning. Local HOA accused of fraudulently annexing private property. The fallout was immediate. Social media exploded. Neighbors started sharing their own suspicions about shady HOA dealings. Homeowners from other states chimed in, posting horror stories about similar scams. Even a local news station picked up the story, calling for a statement from the HOA. I could only imagine the chaos behind closed doors. Whitaker and his cronies must have been scrambling for damage control. But instead of backing off, they did something even more insane. They sent me another letter. This time, the language was different. More aggressive. "Due to your continued refusal to comply with HOA standards and your inflammatory attacks on this community, the board is considering legal action to seek your removal from the neighborhood." I stared at the words, stunned. They were trying to evict me. Emily stood beside me, her face pale. "Can they do that?" "They sure as hell can try," I muttered. I had expected fines. Harassment. Maybe even lawsuits. But trying to take my home away? They had no idea who they were messing with. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, media calls, and messages from outraged neighbors. The HOA had finally crossed a line so blatant that even the people who had once ignored their nonsense were now paying attention. The journalist's report on their fraudulent land grab had gone viral, and for the first time, Whitaker and his cronies were losing control of the narrative, but instead of backing down, they did what bullies always do when cornered. They got desperate. It started with small things. My mailbox was suddenly missing one morning, ripped clean off the post. My trash bins were accidentally knocked over, garbage strewn across my driveway. A notice showed up taped to my door stating that my property would soon be undergoing a mandatory compliance inspection. But I knew the real storm was still coming. And when it did, it hit in the dead of night. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up to the distant growl of an engine. At first, I thought it was just a garbage truck making rounds, but as I sat up and rubbed my eyes, I noticed an eerie glow moving across my window, a flickering orange beam, headlights. And they weren't on the street. They were in my yard. I threw off the blankets and bolted for the window. My stomach dropped. A bulldozer was being unloaded from a flatbed truck right in front of my house. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. But then I saw them, three men in dark work uniforms, wearing caps pulled low, moving with a sense of quiet urgency, no HOA logos. No official city vehicles. These weren't enforcement officers. They were private contractors, and they were about to destroy my garden. I grabbed my phone and sprinted down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet as I yanked open the front door. The night air was thick and humid, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Hey!" I shouted, storming onto my porch. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The workers barely flinched. One of them, a tall guy with a clipboard, turned, squinting at me under the yellow glow of a street lamp. "Sir, we've been contracted for a removal job." "Who contracted you?" I demanded, already knowing the answer. The guy didn't reply. He just glanced at the bulldozer operator and gave a nod. The engine roared to life. Pure rage shot through me. I marched straight toward them, blocking the path of the machine. "You're not touching anything," I growled. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." The clipboard guy sighed, rubbing his forehead like I was the one being unreasonable. "Sir, if you don't step aside, we'll have to call the authorities." I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound. "Great idea. Let's do that. I'll call the real police, and you can explain why you're out here committing property destruction at 2 in the damn morning." That made them hesitate. The guy with the clipboard exchanged glances with his crew. The bulldozer's engine idled loudly, filling the tense silence between us. Then another voice cut through the night. "Smile for the camera, boys." I turned to see Emily standing on the porch, her phone held high, recording everything. The glow from the screen lit up her face, her expression sharp with fury. "You're trespassing," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And we've got it all on video." The workers froze. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. They had probably expected an easy job: sneak in, rip up some plants, be gone before sunrise. They hadn't counted on being recorded. The clipboard guy muttered something under his breath, then reached for his phone. "We're gonna need confirmation on this," he said, stepping away from the bulldozer. But it was already too late. From down the street, the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights filled the darkness. A patrol car rolled up slow, sirens off, but the authority unmistakable. The officers inside must have seen the construction equipment and figured something wasn't right. The moment the police car came to a stop, the workers immediately backed off, stepping away from the bulldozer like it had suddenly turned radioactive. The officer got out, adjusting his belt, his gaze sweeping over the scene before landing on me. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I crossed my arms. "Good question. These guys showed up in the middle of the night trying to tear down my garden. They claim they were hired for the job, but they won't say by who." The officer turned his gaze toward the clipboard guy, who suddenly looked a whole lot less confident. "That true?" The guy hesitated. Then, finally, he shook his head. We were just following work orders." "And those orders came from?" No response. The officer exhaled sharply. "All right, here's what's going to happen. You're all going to pack up and leave. Right now. And if I see any of you on this property again, I'll be pressing trespassing charges myself." The workers didn't argue. They just started moving, fast. The bulldozer was shut down, the truck was reloaded, and within minutes, the entire crew had vanished into the night. As the patrol car pulled away, Emily let out a shaky breath. "Jesus," she muttered, lowering her phone. I turned back to my garden, the soil untouched, the plants still standing. They had tried. They had failed, asterisk asterisk. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after the failed demolition, I woke up to something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. My garden was still standing. My home was still mine. But I knew better than to assume the HOA would back down just because they had been caught in the act. If anything, their desperation would only make them more reckless. And I was right. That afternoon, I received another letter from the HOA, only this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a full-blown apology. The board acknowledged that certain actions may have been taken without proper authorization and assured me that corrective steps were being implemented. In other words, they were scrambling to cover their asses. Whitaker had been forced to step down. Karen, the HOA's enforcer, had gone silent. And according to my neighbors, half the board had resigned overnight as news of their fraudulent activities spread. Then came the cherry on top, an official notice rescinding every fine they had issued me and my neighbors. Not just me. Everyone. It was a desperate attempt to quiet the backlash, but the damage was done. The HOA had lost its grip on the neighborhood. The story went viral. News outlets picked it up. People across the country started sharing their own horror stories about HOAs abusing power, fabricating rules, and targeting homeowners for profit. What started as a small dispute over my backyard garden had turned into a full-scale reckoning. And the best part? My community finally fought back. A month later, the new HOA board held an emergency vote to scale back their authority, rolling back years of overreach. Policies were rewritten. Homeowners who had once been too afraid to speak out were now running the show. For the first time, the people, not a handful of power-hungry board members, had control of their own neighborhood. Standing on my porch, looking out over my untouched garden, I couldn't help but smile. They had tried to take everything from me. They had threatened, harassed, and even tried to rewrite reality to get what they wanted. And in the end, they lost. Because when you stand your ground, when you refuse to let people like Karen push you around, bullies always fall. So tell me, have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.